Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank Vicky and Valerie for having me here and for everybody coming to see me. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes when one prepares to speak, one thinks, what does one say in a half an hour? This is how I'd like to begin today. Something that I'm very passionate about. A lot of pain in my heart, a lot of anger in my heart. What's happening in the world, but what's also happening in this country. Who is this young girl? What is her name? Why doesn't anybody here know her name? I don't mean to be reprimanding you. I'm making a larger point. Her name is Aqsa Parvez. Why is her name not in our consciousness? Why do we not know the name of Aqsa Parvez in our society? And this is what I want to talk about today. How the left, how selfish it is, how heartless it is, how it pretends that it's for humanitarianism. But in fact, the left is anti-humanitarian. And today it is choking us. It is suffocating us. Our hands are tied behind our backs. We are blindfolded. We cannot confront the enemy we face. But this is the issue that I want to mold my discussion by. 16-year-old girl strangled to death by her father. And I'm going to say it, a Muslim father. Because she wanted to be a human being. She wanted to grow up like a Canadian girl in Toronto. Is it a crime not to want to veil? Is that a crime? We have a president of the United States that thinks he's a brave man, that says that Muslim women should have the right to veil. Wow, that's brave. As if there's any danger to women having the right to veil in the United States. You know what a real man with integrity, you know what a real man with some guts would have said? A woman in the Muslim world has a right not to wear a veil and not to face violence because of it, not to have acid thrown in her face because of it. And as the President of the United States, I stand up for Muslims, women, right not to veil. But our President of the United States did not say that. So what's happening today, why I want to discuss this, why we don't know the name of Aqsa Parvez, is because the left controls the boundaries of our discourse. It controls our media. It controls our culture. And I'll tell you, as somebody that studied the left for more than 25 years of my life, I began as a kid studying the left. At 8 years old, for God's sakes. This is something that I study. I'm telling you, there is a force called the left. It's vicious. It poses itself as a humanitarian movement, but it's suffocating our right to speak. So what I mean is, we are not allowed to speak about Aqsa Parvez. Because you see, the left controls the boundaries of our debate. It does not allow criticism of evil ideologies that are our enemies. It doesn't allow it. That's what I'm going to explore here today with you, what's happening. In my life, when I say, you know, I'm really concerned about Aqsa Parvez, you know what I get? Oh, are you a fascist? Jamie, not all Muslims do that. This is the response I get from the left, from leftists, from feminists. So when I say, well, how about Aqsa Parvez? And the response is, oh, Glazov, not all Muslims do that. But I never said that all Muslims did that. But the people that say that, they go and sleep very well at night. And they're not doing anything to prevent more Aqsa Parvez. They sleep at night because they don't care about Aqsa Parvez. They don't care about the ideology that killed her. It wasn't just her Muslim father. Her Muslim father killed Aqsa Parvez because she wanted to be free. Because there is a religion that's masquerading itself as a religion, but is really a political ideology, is a tremendous hatred of women and sexuality, of women's freedom, and it hates women. And she was punished because of that ideology. Do we have the guts in our society to stand up for the memory of Aqsa Parvez? At the moment, we do not. Aqsa Parvez wanted to be a cool 16-year-old girl. She wanted to go to dances. She used to hide the veil in her bag. She used to wear the veil, but on her way to school, she would hide it. But her father started finding out. You would think that across the United States would be outraged that this girl was strangled, but they don't know her name, and they don't want us saying her name. Now, the left very much hates individuals, and it hates the memory of victims. That's why I wanted to do this today. Because if the left is watching right now, I'm not going to let you erase Aqsa Parvez's memory. The left loves to erase history. It wants to erase the victims of our enemies. And I wanted to bring a face to Aqsa Parvez today because I care, and I want everybody else to care. And I want to break through this wall that the left has created in our society where we can't speak about the victims of Islamic totalitarianism. Now, Aqsa was strangled to death in Toronto by her father. He was charged along with the brother, and they're doing time in jail now, so at least the justice system in Canada at least is doing something. But the media does not discuss the word Islam, does not discuss why she was killed. You know, they just call it like some kind of domestic violence. We're not allowed to talk about why Aqsa was killed. How is Aqsa Parvez remembered today? Plot 774. Her family pretends she never existed. There's no tombstone for Aqsa Parvez. Nothing. Just a number. That's what totalitarianism does to its victims. That's what her family does. They pretended that Aqsa's never existed. This is in a field somewhere. Now, there's a larger discussion here. This is what the left does in general. As I said before, it erases people as if they've never existed. And Aqsa's family pretends she never existed. My father, Yuri Glazov, the Soviet regime tried to pretend he never existed. My father knew he was born in a slave camp. He was born in the Soviet Union. From the time he was a little boy, he knew he was a slave. And he started planning to get out. He used to look at maps and want to swim across bodies of water. But he knew that he was living in a prison camp. And I'll tell you, one of our friends, one of the greatest people in the 21st century and the 20th century, Vladimir Bukovsky, perhaps you've heard of him. He's a very great Russian dissident. And when he finally got into prison in the Soviet Union, he was like, oh, finally I'm at home. He felt comfortable in prison in the Soviet Union because he says that that's where he belonged. He couldn't, with his conscience, live in a totalitarian regime and not stand up for the truth, not stand up for justice and go to prison. What a great man. And if you see any passion in me today, since I was a kid, worried for Vladimir Bukovsky, who was being tormented in Russian psychiatric hospitals, it was because my father stood up against the Soviet regime. He signed petitions on behalf of people who were imprisoned for their political and religious beliefs. But the Soviet Union, the Soviet regime also tried to wipe the existence of my father, tried to erase his name. And I just want to say, we have a little fund at Dalhousie University for my father that we're trying to keep his memory alive. And afterwards, I ask everybody if you can just come and grab one of these at the end. And if even a little bit of help will be really, really appreciated, because we're trying to keep the memory of my father and his stand for freedom alive. And this is in academia, so you can imagine what academics tried to do to the memory of my father. Who is this individual? Okay. Somebody said Beyonce? Okay, it must be the angle. Very close. Please remember who said Pamela Geller, because that's the correct answer. I was afraid for a minute because I've got so many Beyonce photos. I thought I mixed them up. And I'm also a New Kids on the Block fan, but that's on the lowdown. Who stood up for Aqsa Parvez? Here's another thing. Why in our society did nobody stand up for this girl? She's a hero in my books, because Pamela Geller stood up and said, I'm going to put a tombstone, I'm going to put a memorial or something for Aqsa Parvez. Is that a crime to remember a 16-year-old girl that was strangled to death by her father? You would think that people would support this brave modern-day freedom fighter to put a memorial in the memory of a 16-year-old girl. But she was called a fascist and a racist and an Islamophobe, and she's been smeared and caricatured in all these vicious ways, but she kept fighting. And we should stand behind freedom fighters. And I'll tell you right now, Pamela Geller tried to put something on the there, a tombstone or whatever. Her family told her, if you do this, we will knock that tombstone down. But Pamela Geller didn't give up. She didn't give up for totalitarianism wiping out the memory of a young girl. And Pamela Geller pursued that cause. American Independence Park in Jerusalem. Pamela Geller was able to make a memorial grove for Aqsa Parvez. Let's give a hand to Pamela Geller. Let me go back to plot 100 and 774. This is the image I want to speak about. Erasing historical memory. And this is what the left does. And this is what I want to talk about. We're not going to allow this, and I don't want to allow it. What the left does. So I want to speak very quickly about why the left does this. I will use three quick examples, three quick anecdotes about why, in my heart, I get so upset. Why I've been so angry, why there's been feelings of hate and confusion, and why I've studied this issue. I was in academia for 10, 12, 15 years. Typical experience. I'm sitting in a lab, and a feminist is sitting, graduate feminist is sitting, and she's almost at the point of tears. I am so upset how capitalism exploits us women. We are forced to wear bikinis on the beach. We are forced to buy Pepsi and Coca-Cola. And because we're forced to wear bikinis, this is the way that capitalism pushes us into margins of powerlessness. This is the way that capitalism decapitates. And so I'm sitting there just nodding, being friendly, but really worrying that maybe bikinis will become illegal, but that's another issue. So I'm sitting and nodding and pretending I'm agreeing with her because this is good. I mean, at least, this woman kind of cares about human rights a little bit. So I'm like, oh, geez, this is great. You know what? I got a petition right here. Women having acid thrown in their face in the Islamic world because they don't want to marry a Muslim man. This is embedded in the culture and rooted in the misogyny in Islamic literature. Honor killings, forced marriages. Little young Muslim girls being forced to marry their cousins and having handicapped, retarded children because of it. Can you sign a petition here on behalf of women who suffer under Islamic gender apartheid? Are you a fascist? And just pale white. Is something wrong here? I think something is wrong. And as I was growing up, and I realized there's some kind of a pathology here. There's some kind of a sickness here. But that story I just told, that mentality is in the White House. That mentality is in the White House today. That mentality is our media today. For 10 years, I studied the Cold War. You can imagine that my heart was very much connected to what was happening in the Cold War. I grew up in my life worried for Vladimir Bukovsky, about Alexander Solzhenitsyn, incidents in the Soviet Union. And I argued with a lot of academics during that time, etc., about the Cold War, about the Vietnam War, about the Korean War, about the Berlin airlift, about what started the Cold War, about Alger Hiss, about the Rosenbergs, etc. Finally, the declassified documents come out. Venona transcripts come out. We find out everything. And all those transcripts and Venona documents and all the declassified documents confirmed everything that conservatives were saying all those years. Alger Hiss proven to be a spy. Stalin built the bomb because of this and that. The spies, the aggression of the North Koreans in the war, even though that South Korea somehow started it. And I came up to my colleagues, historians, and I said, look at this declassified document. Look at this declassified document about it. This is life. You know what they did? Glazov's chasing old ghosts. Glazov is engaged in necrophilia. So let me ask you something here. Historians are ridiculing me for being interested in the past. Think about this for a minute, okay? Is there a pathology here? There's a pathology. 9/11. I was scared to come out of my house. In Toronto, a lot of leftist communities. There was a artsy-fartsy, I guess you can call them, communities. And my heart was in a lot of pain on 9/11 because I love America. I would kiss an American flag if you give it in front of me. I'll get on the ground and kiss the ground of this country because coming from a totalitarian regime, I could smell freedom at the age of 5.5 when I got here. And thank you for having me here. And thank you for producing such a beautiful country. And I love this country. And when 9/11 happened, I can tell you that my heart wept because those towers to me represent something very beautiful. They represent freedom and liberty and multiculturalism and freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And when you watch the people holding hands together, their last words was, "I love you," to their parents. Their last effort was to join hands with another human being and fall off buildings. But I knew that when I was going to walk outside and go to the local bar, I knew what I was going to hear. Oh, the Americans really had it coming to them. Oh, the Americans are really mediaizing this. The victims of 9/11, they're not the only ones that died on that day. What is that? What exactly is that? But what is that? When George Bush legitimately got some tanks and troops and planes and bombs together to teach the Taliban a lesson, yeah, I like that. Do you? So, when that was happening, and yes, we might get into a debate whether the strategy was correct, whether there's wisdom to nation building today. I know it's all very complicated. But he went there to dislodge the people that housed the people that caused 9/11. But let me ask you something. Do you remember the demonstrations that started against the invasion of Afghanistan? Do you remember the demonstrations that started against the Iraq War? I don't know if you noticed, but something was really weirding me out here. Leftist feminists marching in a demonstration right next to Islamists with beards, screaming, "Allahu Akbar!" I mean, wait a minute. So, Allahu Akbar is what the suicide bombers scream before they blow themselves up, along with women and children and babies in cribs, and you're screaming Allahu Akbar? That's what the left is, by the way. That's why I'm so passionate about this. And if the left is watching right now, I'm the closest thing to an enemy that you'd want to see. Because that's anti-humanitarianism. And when they were screaming Allahu Akbar, can you tell me? Naomi Wolf traveled to the Muslim world, was visiting. She called the veil sexy. She thinks it's very sexy. She went to Egypt and called the veil sexy. You know that 95% of the women under that veil have had their clitoris and private parts forcibly cut out and removed? Does Naomi Wolf think that that's sexy? But my point is that these leftist feminists that are marching side by side with Islamists, they would be exterminated within 10 seconds of contact with our enemy. Naomi Klein, a leftist author, she wrote an article titled, "Bring Najaf to New York." Al-Sadr's killing fields in Iraq. She wants them in New York. She would be killed within 30 seconds. Those were the tortured killing fields of Al-Sadr. There were gang rapes, they were gouging people's eyes out, exterminating women. This is the left. My point right now is that after that 9/11 experience, when I saw the left cheering, and I will tell you, we saw it on the national scale, Eric Foner, Norman Mailer, we can go on and on, you could see a glee when 9/11 happened. The left was celebrating here the same way the Palestinians when they were passing out candies. The left was in a celebration. We're imperialists, right? We had people screaming Allahu Akbar. So I finally decided to sit down and write this. Now, I don't mean to be acting like Don King here trying to sell something, but I sat down and wrote United in Hate. It's my analysis of why the left adores our tyrannical enemies and why this behavior occurs. Now, we left the Soviet Union in 1972. I have to turn the conversation back to myself sometimes. Extra point, where is Jamie Glazov in this picture? I'm the little guy. Right before we left the Soviet Union. Well, we were able to get out. That's another long story. But the Soviet Union always struggled with what to do with its dissidents. And at that time, with the Brezhnev detente period, they threw some of them out because sometimes they were worth more trouble than they wanted. The tragedy today is that back in the day, we had a Ronald Reagan. We had maybe Nixon. But back in the day, the West stood up for dissidents. The Soviet Union was confused about how to deal with its imprisoned people. You think people care today? You think Ahmadinejad is losing sleep when he's going to kill this Christian pastor pretty soon? You think Obama's going to say anything? We've become impotent. We've become a laughingstock because of the people that are in the White House today. Khodorkovsky is in prison in the Soviet Union. Putin, a mafia thug, gangster, KGB man that put an innocent man in prison all these years, sadistically tormenting him, and they're not afraid of the West anymore. That's the tragedy. But overall, what's happening is plot 774 in our media today, the White House, etc., not saying a word. Let me talk quickly about why. What is this mindset? What is the left? What is it? First of all, leftists believe overall in the perfectibility of human institutions and of the human race. So they're unhappy here. It's a secular belief that people can be made perfect. Okay? In order to make a perfect planet and a perfect world, you need to destroy it, and then you build the paradise on the ashes. Okay, so that's the simple way of explaining. The left is interested in destroying this society because they want to build their perfect utopia on top of this society. So while they're engaged in this plan, if you start talking about this, guess what happens? Okay, let's think about this. So I have a lot of leftist acquaintances. So if you tell them about Aqsa Parvez, and then they start going, oh, Islam, wow, you know, Judeo-Christian tradition's a bit better than that. Oh, geez, there must be some nice things about America and our civilization. The moment you start thinking those things, the moment you start realizing that what happened to Aqsa Parvez was wrong and evil and that we should remember her and oppose that ideology, the moment you concede that, then you would have to concede that we live in a beautiful society that's worth protecting and defending, right? But they can't do that. They can't take that step. So the key is to keep plot 774 in check, right? Because by denying the evil of adversaries, that way you can continue your war on your own society. Because the moment you accept that there's real evil out there, you're not a leftist anymore. Now, it's very difficult. They're so indoctrinated to leave. I know that you all know this. People even told me today they have a leftist cousin or brother or member. I know leftists very well, and I'll give you an example of what the main problem is. 2 years ago, a woman that knows me for 20 years and continually surprised about what I think. You like George W. Bush? Why? And I said to her, you know what? Should I even bother telling you why? Because even if we're on the phone for 2 hours and I explained it to you, let's hypothetically say that you ended up agreeing with me. Number one, would you have any friends left? What if you started verbalizing these thoughts in your group of friends? What would happen? We all know the left is unforgiving. The left doesn't have friends because they're friends. The leftists make friends, like Che Guevara said, as long as it conforms to their beliefs. So it's a social life. For leftists, it's a social life. Leftists pushed me out of their life because they don't want to hear the facts. They want to be popular over here. So, Jamie, please just don't come around. These people really like me right now. You know, because if I start saying that Islam is inferior to Western civilization, I'm going to lose all my friends. right? So they lose their social community, and they also lose the identity of how they see themselves, because it's a great feeling of self-gratification to be a leftist, because you're a little bit better than everybody else, and you're a self-appointed social redeemer. See, you know the answers. When you're looking at the human race, you're looking downward, right? And you're going to help people. You're going to solve the problem, and you also know who is to be saved and who is to be damned. So, but many people have made this step. Many people have made the step. David Horowitz, a great hero that I am very grateful to work for. Can we please give a hand to him? He writes about it in Radical Sun, leaving the left. He was abandoned, called names. He's vilified today because he had the guts to leave his community. I have a couple minutes left. Let me finish by saying this, that because they want destruction, it makes total sense why they were happy during Ground Zero. Think about it. When jihadis perpetrated Ground Zero, that's the ashes upon which you're going to build your new world. So that's why they scream Allahu Akbar together, because both are interested in destruction. That's their alliance. Islamists are going to build the Sharia paradise. Leftists are going to build their classless society. But it's on the ashes of free societies. The consequences of this mentality. That's one of the consequences. I want to bring a face to the victims. Noor al-Maliki, murdered by her father in a Phoenix suburb because she was too westernized. Why don't we name? Why is the media not still? Where are the women in the women's studies departments? I want to say something to the feminists today, the leftist feminists. Do you have any shame at last? Buffalo, New York. Asiya Hassan beheaded by a Muslim whose main goal was to show of Islam. Why aren't we talking about this lady? Because the left is silencing us. The Saeed girls, both murdered by an Egyptian father, honor killings, too westernized. He's at large, hasn't been punished. Why? Why is our society still not talking about that? Because the left suffocates our ability to do so. Rudiana Jamil with her son and killer, Salim Israel. He killed his mother because she wanted to remarry. What are the consequences of this? What are the consequences of the left? Is it just benign? Does it not matter? Bonus question. What's happening here? Everybody gets a free book. Saigon, 1975. America won that war, but because of the anti-war movement, and because the anti-war movement shaped the mentality when finally in the White House and in Congress they didn't supply aid to the South Vietnamese. And because of that, South Vietnam fell. North Vietnamese generals today admit and boast, thanking the anti-war movement. They say that it was the anti-war movement that won the war for them. What was the consequence? You think the left is benign? You think the left doesn't cause any damage? Millions of people killed. Re-education camps, death squads in South Vietnam, the boat people. Cambodia fell because of this. Laos fell because of this. Because of this, in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge came to power, killed 1/4 of the population, 3 million people. That's what happened in Vietnam. You think what the left does is benign? Guess who helped bring the Ayatollah to power? Anybody know? Thank you. Double points. You also said Beyonce earlier, so you have 2 points. Today, Jimmy Carter is responsible for much of what we're seeing today. Pulled the rug out from the Shah's feet, brought the Ayatollah Khomeini to power. Major force behind 9/11 as well. Very quickly, let me also tell you about 9/11. You think the left doesn't have an effect on us? Do you know that right before 9/11 happened, do you know that the FBI got their hands on the 20th hijacker's laptop, Zacharias Moussaoui? Inside that laptop were the names of the people in the Hamburg cell that perpetrated 9/11. Guess what? Because of leftist ideology, because of Janet Reno's law during the Clinton administration, there was a wall up. Intelligence communities couldn't communicate with one another. Law enforcement couldn't communicate with intelligence. This is because of the left. And they forbid going into Moussaoui's computer. Guess if they would have got into that computer and got a hold of that Hamburg cell. You know why I'm upset? Can everybody get upset with me, please? We could have prevented 9/11. The left made us vulnerable to 9/11. Guess what's happening today? Because of our fear, because the left has made us terrified to speak the truth. We live in a society where we're terrified to even name the enemy that's trying to slice our throat. Okay, bonus question. What's his name? Nadal Hassan, excellent. Doctor. This guy's in the U.S. Army. Guess what he's lecturing about? Oh, you know, there should be acid poured down unbelievers' throats. All unbelievers belong in the fires of hell. We need to wage jihad. He's teaching this as a psychiatrist in the U.S. Army. And what are people doing? Yeah, maybe we should say something, but I don't want to be racist. Why is there that mentality? Because the left shapes our society's way of thinking. And guess what happened? Guess what happened because of our fear and our silence? Plot 774, Aqsa Parvez, they are also part of Plot 774. But we're not going to let the left make us forget these people. 13 dead at Fort Hood to a psychomaniac Islamist that operated because of the objective of jihad. The Obama administration came out with a report on this, didn't even include the words Islam or jihad. But that's what's caused by it. But if we stand up, and if we erase Plot 774 like Pamela Geller did, and put memory to the faces, and when we put memory to the faces, we put a spotlight on the demons and on the vermin that want to extinguish the light. And if we do that, we can shed light on that vermin, and they'll go scurrying back into the dark. If we continue to focus on the victims, ladies and gentlemen, the victims of Fort Hood, Aqsa Parvez, the victims in Vietnam, etc., we will continue to fight this war effectively, and we will prevail.